Every day presents a choice between action and delay. Most people know what they should do, but struggle to start. Time passes, plans stay unfinished, and important goals keep getting pushed aside. This creates frustration and a sense of falling behind, even when effort is present. This audiobook is built around one clear idea: taking action every day, even when it feels difficult. Not waiting for perfect motivation. Not relying on ideal conditions, but building a steady pattern of movement toward what matters. Inside these chapters, you will learn simple and practical ways to break hesitation, start difficult tasks without delay, and stay consistent when energy is low. You will see how small daily actions shape discipline, how focus improves when distractions are reduced, and how progress becomes more stable through repetition. Each part is designed to be direct and usable in real life. The focus is not theory, but behavior you can apply immediately. The goal is to help you move from intention to execution with less internal resistance. If you have ever felt stuck between knowing what to do and actually doing it, this is where that pattern begins to change. What follows is a step-by-step approach to building daily discipline through action that does not depend on mood or timing. Chapter 1. Commit to one hard task before breakfast each day. Most people wake up and immediately enter a negotiation with themselves. The alarm goes off, and instead of clarity, there is hesitation. The mind starts offering alternatives that feel reasonable in the moment. A few more minutes in bed, a quick scroll through messages, a slow start to ease into the day. It feels harmless, but it sets the tone for everything that follows. The day begins with delay, and delay quietly becomes a habit that spreads into work, health, decisions, and personal goals. A different path exists, and it is not complicated. It is simple, direct, and demanding. Before breakfast, before comfort, before distraction, one hard task gets completed, not planned, not postponed. Finished, this single discipline shifts how the entire day unfolds because it removes the possibility of avoidance early. It forces action before excuses grow strong enough to take control. There is a reason mornings matter so deeply. In the early hours, the mind is less cluttered. Fewer demands exist from the outside world. There is a brief window where intention can override emotion. Most people waste this window without realizing its value. They give it away to low-effort behavior and then spend the rest of the day trying to recover momentum that never fully returns. Choosing one hard task before breakfast is not about productivity tricks. It is about identity. It is about becoming the type of person who acts before resistance can interfere. Hard tasks do not need to be dramatic. They only need to matter and require effort. It could be finishing a delayed report, completing a workout that has been avoided, studying a difficult topic, making an uncomfortable phone call, or organizing something that has been ignored. What defines the task is not size, but resistance. If it feels easy, it does not count. The human mind is designed to conserve energy. It naturally avoids discomfort. That is not weakness, it is biology. But discipline is not biology. Discipline is a trained response. When a hard task is completed early in the day, something important happens internally. The mind registers that avoidance did not win. This creates a subtle but powerful shift in self-perception. Instead of seeing yourself as someone who delays, you begin to recognize yourself as someone who executes. That recognition matters more than motivation. Motivation rises and falls. It reacts to mood, sleep, weather, and stress. Discipline is different. Discipline is built through repetition of uncomfortable actions done consistently. The early morning hard task becomes the foundation of that repetition. The first few days of this practice feel unnatural. The mind resists strongly. It offers logical excuses. It suggests better timing later in the day. It argues that energy is too low. These thoughts will appear regardless of how committed the intention feels the night before. This is normal. Nothing is wrong when resistance appears. Resistance is expected. It is the boundary between intention and transformation. The important decision happens in those first moments after waking. Not after coffee, not after planning. Right then, before the day has fully formed. Action taken at that moment carries more weight than action taken later because it is done without emotional build-up. It is raw discipline, no negotiation, no delay, just movement. A simple approach works best. One task is chosen the night before. Not three, not a list of possibilities. One specific action that feels slightly uncomfortable. It must be clear enough that there is no confusion in the morning. Clarity removes hesitation. When the mind has to decide in the morning, it creates delay. Decision-making drains energy. Pre-commitment removes that drain. The next morning, the task is started immediately. No waiting for perfect conditions. No rearranging the environment for comfort. Imperfect conditions are accepted. The goal is completion, not comfort. Progress begins the moment action starts, not when everything feels ready. There is a quiet power in doing difficult things before eating. Hunger, even small, sharpens focus. The body is in a more alert state. There is less tendency to sink into comfort. This physical state supports mental discipline. Over time, the brain begins to associate morning discomfort with achievement. That association is important. It creates a reward system that is internal rather than external. Many people live in a cycle where reward comes before effort. They seek ease first and then struggle to produce results afterward. This reverses the natural order of growth. Real progress happens when effort comes first and reward follows. The early hard task reinforces this order every single day. There will be days when energy feels low. Sleep will be insufficient. Stress will be present. These are the days when the practice matters most. Discipline is not proven when conditions are perfect. It is proven when conditions are difficult. Completing one hard task under low energy builds more strength than completing 5 tasks on an easy day. There is also a psychological shift that happens after consistent practice. The hard task stops feeling like a mountain. It begins to feel like a checkpoint, something that must be done, not debated. This shift is subtle but powerful. It means the mind is no longer in charge of whether action happens. Action becomes automatic. At this stage, excuses lose influence. They still appear, but they no longer control behavior. The gap between thought and action becomes smaller. That gap is where most people lose their potential. In that gap, hesitation grows, doubt expands, and time is wasted. Closing that gap is one of the most important transformations a person can make. To support this habit, the environment must be shaped with intention. Distractions should not be negotiated with in the morning. They should already be out of reach. The phone should not be the first object interacted with. Notifications should not be the first source of information. The morning should belong to action, not reaction. When the mind is exposed to external input too early, focus fragments. Each message, each alert, each piece of content pulls attention away from internal direction. The hard task requires full attention. Protecting that attention is not optional. If discipline is the goal, the environment does not need to be perfect. It only needs to be controlled, enough to reduce friction for action and increase friction for distraction. Simple changes create strong results. Preparing what is needed for the task the night before reduces resistance in the morning. If the task is exercise, clothes should be ready. If it is writing, materials should be open and accessible. If it is study, resources should already be placed in front of you. Small preparation reduces excuses. There is a deeper layer to this practice that goes beyond productivity. It is the relationship between self-respect and action. Every time a hard task is completed before breakfast, a message is sent internally. Promises made to oneself matter. This is not abstract, it is psychological conditioning. The mind learns trust through repetition. When promises are kept consistently, self-trust grows. When promises are broken repeatedly, self-trust weakens. Without self-trust, discipline collapses. Without discipline, goals remain ideas. This is why the morning task is powerful. It rebuilds trust in a very direct way. No need for complex systems. Just one action, completed daily, without exception. There will be temptation to increase complexity over time, to add more tasks, to expand the system. This often leads to failure. Simplicity is what makes the habit sustainable. One hard task is enough. The goal is consistency, not overload. Once consistency is stable, everything else can be built on top of it. Some days, the task will be completed with intensity and focus. Other days, it will feel slow and heavy. Both outcomes are valuable. What matters is completion. Discipline is not emotional performance. It is behavioral consistency. Waiting for perfect emotional states weakens progress. Acting regardless of state strengthens it. Over time, this practice begins to influence the rest of the day. After completing a difficult task early, smaller tasks feel easier. Decisions become clearer. There is less mental noise. The sense of control increases. Even external stress does not feel as overwhelming, because internal stability has been established early. People often search for confidence in external achievements. But real confidence is built through repeated evidence of capability. Each morning completion becomes evidence. Not theory, not hope, but proof. That proof accumulates quietly until self-image changes. There is also a long-term compounding effect. A single hard task per day may seem small, but over weeks and months it becomes hundreds of completed actions that others postpone indefinitely. This accumulation creates distance between those who act early and those who delay. Not because of talent, but because of consistency. There will be moments of relapse, days where the habit is skipped. That is expected. What matters is not perfection, but return. The return to discipline is what defines progress. Missing one morning does not erase identity. Staying away from discipline does. The practice is not about never failing. It is about never staying in failure. When resistance appears again, the response becomes familiar. No argument, no debate, action. The body moves before the mind creates alternatives. This is the point where discipline becomes embodied rather than intellectual. It is no longer something thought about. It is something done automatically. Eventually, something shifts that cannot be easily explained in simple terms. Life begins to feel more directed, less scattered. Goals stop feeling distant and start feeling reachable. Not because obstacles disappear, but because personal consistency increases capacity to handle them. This is the quiet reward of committing to one hard task before breakfast. It is not dramatic transformation overnight. It is gradual strengthening of character. A steady reduction in avoidance. A steady increase in action. A steady alignment between intention and behavior. There is no need for perfect conditions to begin. There is only the need for decision. The morning will always arrive with choices. The difference lies in which choice is made first. Comfort or effort, delay or action, avoidance or discipline. When effort is chosen before comfort, something fundamental changes. The day no longer controls direction. Direction is set before the world begins to interfere. That is the essence of this practice. Not motivation, not inspiration, structure, repetition, action before ease. Over time, this becomes more than a habit. It becomes a standard, a personal rule that defines how life is approached. And once that standard is established, it quietly influences every other area of life, until discipline is no longer something being built, but something being lived. Chapter 2. Rise early and start before your excuses wake up. Most people do not lose their day in the middle of chaos. They lose it at the beginning, in silence, before anything meaningful has even started. The first moments after waking carry more influence than they are given credit for. In that space, before responsibility fully arrives, there is a decision being made without words. Either control is taken, or control is surrendered. Either movement begins, or hesitation is allowed to settle in. Waking early is not about copying a routine. It is about claiming time before the world begins to demand attention. There is a difference between being awake and being ready. Many people are awake for hours before they actually become ready to act. Their body is up, but their mind is still partially asleep in habits of delay, distraction, and passive consumption. Starting before excuses appear is not a poetic idea. It is a practical strategy for overcoming the mind's tendency to negotiate. Excuses do not arrive fully formed. They develop when there is time for them to grow. When the gap between waking and action is too wide, the mind fills that gap with reasons to delay. Those reasons often sound logical in the moment, but they consistently lead to inaction. Early rising compresses that gap. It reduces the space where doubt can take root. When the body moves quickly into purpose, there is no opportunity for internal debate to take over. Action becomes the first language of the day, not hesitation. There is a quiet strength in the early hours that cannot be replicated later. The environment is different. Fewer interruptions exist. External demands are minimal. Even the atmosphere feels less demanding, as if the world has not fully opened its doors yet. In that stillness, focus becomes easier to access. Thoughts are less scattered. Intentions feel clearer. This is not mystical. It is psychological. Fewer inputs create less mental fragmentation. The challenge is not waking early itself. The challenge is what happens after waking. Many people succeed in getting out of bed earlier than usual, but then lose the advantage by slipping into comfort-based behavior. The phone becomes the first companion. The mind begins absorbing information before it has produced anything. That reversal quietly shifts the day from proactive to reactive. To start before excuses wake up means refusing that reversal. It means choosing movement before comfort is requested. The body does not need to feel ready. Readiness is built through action, not before it. Waiting to feel prepared creates delay that never truly ends. There is always a slightly better feeling promised just a little later. A disciplined morning begins with simplicity. No negotiation with thoughts that suggest postponement. No searching for ideal conditions. The first task is not about intensity, but about direction. It is about proving that movement happens regardless of emotional state. Once that proof is established early, the rest of the day becomes easier to navigate. Excuses are not loud at first. They start as quiet suggestions, a sense of tiredness that feels more convincing than it actually is. A thought that more rest would improve performance later. A belief that starting slowly is more sustainable. None of these ideas are entirely false, but they are incomplete. They ignore the cost of delay, which is loss of momentum. Momentum is fragile in the early hours. Once it is lost, it is difficult to rebuild. When the day begins with hesitation, every task that follows requires more effort than necessary. Even simple responsibilities feel heavier because the mind has already been trained to resist. Starting early interrupts that pattern before it stabilizes. The first action of the day sets a precedent. If that action is strong, the rest of the day tends to align with strength. If it is weak, the day often follows that weakness. This is why timing matters as much as effort. There is also a deeper psychological shift that occurs when early action becomes consistent. The mind begins to trust that waking up will lead to productivity rather than delay. That trust changes the emotional experience of mornings. Instead of resistance upon waking, there is clarity. Instead of negotiation, there is direction. This transformation does not happen instantly. At first, waking early feels like a confrontation with comfort. The body resists leaving warmth and rest. The mind searches for justification to remain inactive. This resistance should not be interpreted as a sign to stop. It is a sign that change is happening. Comfort does not surrender easily. The important decision is made before the alarm even goes off. It is made the night before, when intention is clear and resistance is low. Deciding in advance removes morning uncertainty. It eliminates the opportunity for debate when energy is weakest. Morning discipline is built in the evening, not in the moment of waking. When the alarm rings, there is a narrow window where action must happen quickly. If that window is missed, the mind begins constructing alternatives. Staying in bed becomes more appealing than anticipated. Time becomes flexible in a dangerous way. Minutes stretch into long pauses that weaken resolve. Moving immediately prevents that drift. The body responds faster than the thinking process can create resistance. This is why physical movement is powerful in the morning. Standing up, washing the face, stepping into light, or beginning a simple task interrupts mental inertia. Once movement starts, the mind follows. Early action also creates a psychological advantage over the rest of the world. While others are still easing into the day, something meaningful is already underway. That does not need to be compared or announced. It is a private advantage that builds confidence quietly. Confidence does not come from thinking about capability. It comes from evidence of execution. There is a difference between a slow morning and a delayed morning. A slow morning can still be intentional. A delayed morning is often unintentional drift. The goal is not speed for its own sake, but direction without hesitation. Even a calm, early routine can be powerful if it begins with purpose rather than avoidance. Many people underestimate how much mental noise is created in the first hour of the day. Each unnecessary decision adds friction. What to do first, what to check, what to respond to. That friction drains focus before meaningful work even begins. Early structured action removes that confusion. The mind does not need to choose between options because the path is already defined. As this habit strengthens, mornings begin to feel less like a struggle and more like a controlled environment. The same external world exists, but internal response changes. Instead of reacting to impulses, there is a steady sense of direction. That stability becomes a foundation for better decisions throughout the entire day. There will still be mornings when energy feels low. That does not cancel the practice. Discipline is not measured by emotional consistency. It is measured by behavioral consistency. Acting while tired builds a stronger foundation than waiting for energy that may not arrive. Energy often follows action, not the other way around. Over time, early rising becomes less about forcing behavior and more about identity alignment. The question shifts from whether waking early is possible to whether delaying the day feels acceptable. That shift marks real progress. Behavior no longer depends on motivation. It becomes part of self-definition. Excuses lose influence gradually. They still appear, but they no longer determine action. They become background noise instead of decision makers. This is a subtle but significant change. A mind that no longer obeys excuses becomes capable of sustained discipline in other areas as well. The impact of starting early extends beyond productivity. It influences emotional stability. A day that begins with control tends to carry less internal chaos. There is less urgency driven by guilt or unfinished intention. The mind is not constantly catching up to itself. It is already aligned with action. This alignment reduces stress in a quiet way. Not by removing challenges, but by increasing preparedness. Tasks do not feel overwhelming when the day has already been anchored in discipline. There is a sense of being ahead. Even when responsibilities are heavy, what begins as a simple decision to wake earlier gradually becomes a form of self-training. Each morning is a repetition of the same principle. Act before hesitation grows. Over time, that principle spreads into other decisions throughout life. Difficult conversations are handled sooner. Important work is started earlier. Avoidance becomes less appealing in general. The real value of rising early is not in the hour gained. It is in the mindset trained during that hour. A mind that can act before excuses fully form becomes less vulnerable to procrastination in any context. That is the deeper outcome. Consistency is what transforms this practice from effort into identity. One early morning does not change a life. Repeated early mornings reshape how time is perceived. Days begin to feel more intentional, less reactive, more structured. Life begins to reflect accumulated discipline rather than scattered effort. In the end, waking early is not about defeating sleep. It is about refusing delay. It is about taking ownership of the first moments of consciousness and using them as a foundation for the rest of the day. When that foundation is strong, everything built on top of it becomes more stable, more focused, and more aligned with purpose. Chapter 3. Choose one goal and finish it without delay. Most people do not fail because they lack ambition. They fail because their attention is divided into too many directions at the same time. They start something with energy, then switch to something else when interest fades, then jump again when something easier appears. The result is not a lack of effort, but a lack of completion. Work begins often, but it rarely reaches its final form. This pattern quietly weakens progress more than people realize. A life built on unfinished work creates internal pressure. The mind keeps track of what remains incomplete, even when a person is not consciously thinking about it. That pressure reduces clarity. It creates a background sense of tension that makes even simple decisions feel heavier than they should be. When nothing is finished, everything feels open, and open loops drain focus. Choosing one goal and finishing it without delay breaks that cycle. It removes fragmentation and replaces it with direction. Instead of scattering energy across multiple intentions, attention is directed into a single channel. That channel becomes stronger with focus, while everything else temporarily steps aside. This is not limitation. It is precision. The difficulty is not in understanding this idea. It is in resisting the temptation to keep things open. The mind often prefers options over decisions. Options feel safe. They create the illusion that nothing is being lost. But in reality, every unmade decision consumes mental space. Every unfinished task quietly competes for attention. Over time, this creates a crowded internal environment where clarity becomes rare. Finishing one goal without delay requires a different approach to thinking. It requires treating completion as the priority, not exploration. Many people get stuck in preparation mode. They refine plans, gather information, adjust timing, and wait for conditions to improve. This feels productive, but it often becomes a substitute for action. Preparation without execution becomes another form of delay. A single goal must be selected with intention, not based on what feels easiest, and not based on what feels most exciting in the moment, but based on what actually matters. Once chosen, the decision must be treated as final for that session of work. No switching, no parallel attempts. The strength of this method lies in restriction. When choice is removed after selection, energy stops leaking into alternative. The moment work begins on that goal, hesitation will try to reappear in subtle ways. It may suggest that another task is more urgent. It may introduce doubt about whether this is the right focus. It may create discomfort that pushes toward distraction. These signals are not signs of wrong direction. They are signs of resistance to focus itself. The mind is adjusting to limitation after being used to freedom of switching. Staying with one goal long enough for completion changes that relationship. At first, attention will feel restless. The desire to shift will appear repeatedly. But if switching is refused, something important begins to develop. Depth replaces scattering. The mind starts settling into the work instead of orbiting around it. Progress becomes visible in a way that fragmented effort never allows. There is a distinct shift that happens when a task moves from in progress to finished. Before completion, effort feels uncertain. After completion, effort becomes proof. That proof strengthens confidence more than any plan or intention ever can. It tells the mind that focus leads to results, not just activity. Without completion, effort remains theoretical. With completion, effort becomes real. Many people underestimate how much energy is lost in carrying unfinished goals. Each incomplete task acts like a quiet reminder in the background. Even if ignored, it continues to exist in mental space. When several of these accumulate, the mind becomes crowded with unresolved commitments. This reduces the ability to think clearly about anything new. Finishing one goal removes that burden completely. It clears mental space in a way that multitasking never can. Instead of maintaining several partial efforts, the mind experiences closure. That closure brings relief. But more importantly, it restores focus capacity. A cleared mind is faster, sharper, and more stable in decision-making. Speed plays a critical role in this principle. Delaying completion weakens momentum. When a task is left open too long, energy fades and resistance grows. The longer something remains unfinished, the more effort it takes to return to it. This is why delay is more damaging than difficulty. Difficulty challenges strength, but delay weakens continuity. Working without delay means reducing the distance between intention and execution. When something is decided, action follows immediately, without waiting for a better moment. That immediate response prevents overthinking. Overthinking thrives in pauses. The longer the pause between thought and action, the more complicated a simple task becomes in the mind. This approach does not require constant intensity. It requires consistency of direction. Even slow progress is effective if it continues without interruption. What destroys progress is not slow movement, but stopping and restarting repeatedly. Continuity is more important than speed. A steady focus on one goal naturally builds momentum that accelerates over time. There will be moments when switching feels tempting. Another idea may appear more interesting. A different task may seem easier. These moments test discipline. Choosing to stay with the original goal strengthens control over attention. Each refusal to switch reinforces mental stability. Over time, the mind learns that switching is not an automatic response, but a choice that can be declined. Finishing a goal also changes the perception of effort. What once felt large becomes manageable when approached directly. Many tasks appear overwhelming only because they are not engaged fully. When attention is divided, difficulty feels greater. When attention is unified, difficulty becomes clearer and more solvable. The habit of finishing without delay creates a new relationship with time. Time is no longer seen as something that stretches endlessly. It becomes structured around completion points. Each finished goal marks a clear end, which makes progress visible. Without these endpoints, time feels like continuous motion without direction. There is also a deeper psychological transformation that occurs. When the mind repeatedly experiences completion, it begins to trust itself. That trust reduces hesitation in future tasks. Decisions become faster because the mind has learned that follow-through is reliable. Self-trust is not built through thinking. It is built through finishing. The opposite pattern produces the opposite result. Starting many things without finishing them creates doubt. Even simple tasks begin to feel uncertain because past behavior suggests inconsistency. This is why completion matters more than intention. Intention alone does not shape identity. Completion does. Over time, focusing on one goal at a time reshapes the entire structure of productivity. Work becomes more intentional, less reactive. Decisions become simpler. Mental clutter reduces. There is less need to manage multiple unfinished threads. Instead of juggling, there is progression. This method also strengthens resilience. When attention is fixed on one task, distractions lose influence. External interruptions still exist, but they no longer dictate direction. The mind learns to return to the same point repeatedly without losing orientation. That ability is essential for long-term discipline. Eventually, something subtle changes in how effort is perceived. Work stops feeling like scattered effort spread across obligations. It becomes a sequence of completed actions. Each completion builds on the previous one, creating a sense of steady advancement. That progression is what sustains motivation over time, not emotional excitement. Choosing one goal and finishing it without delay is not about doing less. It is about doing fully. It replaces partial effort with complete execution. It replaces scattered attention with directed focus. It replaces hesitation with continuity. When practiced consistently, this principle becomes more than a method. It becomes a way of operating. A mind trained in completion no longer tolerates unfinished cycles easily. It naturally seeks closure. And in that shift, productivity becomes less about forcing action and more about maintaining alignment with completion as a standard of behavior. Chapter 4. Write today's action list and follow it strictly. Most days feel chaotic, not because life is truly uncontrollable, but because there is no clear structure guiding attention. Without structure, the mind reacts instead of leading. It moves from one impulse to another, responding to whatever feels urgent or interesting in the moment. Hours pass, yet the sense of direction remains weak. At the end of the day, effort feels scattered and incomplete. Even if there was constant activity, clarity begins when the day is shaped before it begins. Writing down a specific action list changes the nature of time itself. Instead of facing an open field of possibilities with no boundaries, the mind is given a defined path. That path does not restrict potential, it focuses it. Energy that would normally dissolve into distraction becomes directed towards specific outcomes. The act of writing creates separation between thought and intention. Thoughts are often temporary and unstable. They shift quickly depending on mood and environment. But when thoughts are transferred onto paper or a screen in the form of clear actions, they become commitments. That shift is subtle but powerful. It turns uncertainty into structure. An effective action list is not long. Excess items weaken focus. When too many tasks are written, the mind loses respect for the list. It becomes noise instead of guidance. The purpose is not to capture everything that could be done, but to identify what must be done today. There is a difference between possibility and necessity, and discipline is built on necessity. Each item on the list should represent movement, not vague intention. Work on project is unclear. Complete section of project report is concrete. The mind responds better to clarity than abstraction. When a task is defined precisely, hesitation decreases because there is no ambiguity about where to start. Writing the list in advance also removes the burden of decision-making during the day. Many people lose energy not in doing work, but in deciding what work to do next. Each small decision drains mental strength. By deciding beforehand, that energy is preserved for execution instead of planning. The morning or the night before becomes a moment of alignment. During that time, distractions are lower and perspective is clearer. It is easier to see what truly matters when immediate pressure is absent. Decisions made in calm conditions are usually more stable than decisions made under urgency. Once the list is written, the real discipline begins, following it without deviation. This is where most people struggle. A list is easy to create, but adherence requires control over impulses. Throughout the day, new ideas appear. Unexpected tasks arise. External requests attempt to redirect attention. Without strict adherence, the list becomes symbolic rather than functional. Following the list strictly means resisting unnecessary detours. It does not mean ignoring all external responsibilities, but it does mean filtering them carefully. Every interruption should be evaluated against the written priorities. If it does not align, it should not override the structure already set. There is a psychological benefit to this approach. When the mind recognizes that a plan will be followed regardless of temporary feelings, internal stability increases. The habit of abandoning structure weakens confidence over time. The habit of maintaining structure strengthens it. Each completed item on the list reinforces a sense of control. That sense of control is not about dominating circumstances, but about directing attention intentionally. Attention is the most valuable resource available during any day. Where attention goes, results follow. When attention is scattered, results weaken. The action list acts like a guardrail. It prevents the mind from drifting too far into low-value activity. Without it, hours can disappear into tasks that feel productive but create little real progress. Responding to messages, checking updates, and switching between minor tasks often creates the illusion of productivity while avoiding meaningful work. Strict adherence to a list breaks that illusion. It forces prioritization. It creates visible boundaries between essential work and unnecessary noise. Over time, this clarity improves judgment. Decisions about what belongs on the list become sharper because experience shows what actually moves life forward. There is also a deeper transformation happening in the background. Every time the list is followed fully, trust in personal discipline increases. That trust is built slowly through repetition. It is not created by motivation or inspiration. It is created by evidence that intentions are being executed without compromise. When the list is ignored or partially followed, the opposite effect occurs. The mind begins to doubt reliability. That doubt does not always appear immediately, but it accumulates quietly. Over time, it weakens confidence in future planning. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. Even a simple list followed fully has more impact than an ambitious list left unfinished. A well-used action list also changes the perception of time. Instead of time feeling like a continuous flow without structure, it becomes segmented into completed units. Each finished task marks a point of closure. These closures create momentum. They make progress visible in real time rather than abstract. Momentum is not built through speed alone. It is built through completion without interruption. When one task leads directly into the next, without unnecessary delay, mental resistance decreases. The mind stops questioning what comes next because the path is already defined. This reduces friction and increases efficiency. There will be moments when deviation feels justified. Something unexpected may appear urgent. Something easier may seem more appealing. In those moments, discipline is tested. The question is not whether flexibility exists, but whether it is being used intentionally or impulsively. Intentional adjustments preserve structure. Impulsive changes destroy it. Strict following of a list does not mean rigidity in every situation. It means commitment to priorities that were carefully chosen. If a new task truly becomes more important, it can replace another, but the decision must be conscious, not reactive. The difference between control and chaos lies in awareness of that choice. As this practice develops, the relationship with work begins to shift. Tasks no longer feel overwhelming because they are no longer vague or unstructured. They are broken into clear, manageable actions. That clarity reduces emotional resistance. When the mind understands exactly what needs to be done, hesitation decreases. Another change occurs in the way distractions are perceived. Without a structured list, distractions feel equally important as work. Everything competes for attention, but when priorities are written, a hierarchy is created. Some actions matter more than others. That hierarchy simplifies decision-making throughout the day. Even fatigue becomes less disruptive when structure exists. A tired mind without direction tends to drift. A tired mind with a clear list still has a path to follow. Energy may be low, but direction remains intact. That alone preserves productivity in situations where motivation would normally fail. The consistency of writing and following an action list gradually builds internal discipline. Over time, this discipline begins to operate automatically. The need for constant effort reduces because behavior becomes habitual. The mind starts expecting structure instead of randomness. Eventually, the list becomes more than a tool. It becomes a reflection of identity. A person who consistently writes and follows daily actions begins to see themselves as organized, focused, and reliable. That identity reinforces behavior, creating a stable cycle of discipline. What begins as a simple practice of writing tasks evolves into a method of shaping attention, reducing distraction, and strengthening execution. It transforms days from reactive experiences into intentional sequences of completed actions. And in that transformation, progress becomes less accidental and more deliberate, built one structured day at a time. Chapter 5. Move your body first to build daily momentum. Most people try to build momentum from the mind first. They sit still, think about what needs to be done, analyze their priorities, and wait for a sense of readiness to appear. But readiness rarely arrives in the form people expect. The body remains inactive, and the mind stays trapped in hesitation. Hours pass in mental preparation without real movement, and the day begins to feel heavier than it should. Momentum does not begin in thought. It begins in motion. The body carries a different kind of intelligence than the mind. When the body moves, even in a simple way, it sends a signal that the day has already started in action, not in hesitation. That signal changes internal chemistry. Energy shifts, focus sharpens, the sense of delay weakens. Starting the day with physical movement is not about fitness goals or structured exercise routines. It is about activating the system. After hours of rest, the body exists in a slow state. Muscles are inactive, circulation is reduced, and mental alertness is still incomplete. Remaining still too long after waking extends that slow state and allows mental resistance to grow stronger. The longer stillness continues, the more difficult initiation becomes. Tasks feel larger than they are, decisions feel heavier. Even simple responsibilities begin to require more mental effort. This is not because the tasks have changed, but because the system has not been activated. Movement interrupts that inertia immediately. It does not need to be intense or complex. It only needs to be intentional. Walking, stretching, light exercise, or even structured physical activity within the home is enough to shift the internal state. What matters is not the form of movement, but the decision to move without delay. There is a direct connection between physical activation and mental clarity. When the body begins to move, blood flow increases, breathing becomes more dynamic, and alertness improves. The mind follows this physical change. Thoughts become more organized, mental fog reduces. The sense of delay that often dominates early hours begins to fade. Many people underestimate how strongly the body influences decision-making. They treat discipline as a purely mental challenge. But when the body remains inactive, the mind becomes more vulnerable to hesitation. Physical stillness often leads to mental stagnation. That is why early movement is so effective. It bypasses overthinking by engaging the system directly. Momentum is not something that appears suddenly. It is something that builds gradually through initiation. The first movement is the most important part of that process. Once the body is in motion, stopping becomes less natural. There is a psychological tendency to continue what has already started. That tendency can be used intentionally to support productivity. Remaining still after waking creates a different pattern. It reinforces delay as the default response. The mind begins to associate mornings with slow starts, gradual awakening, and unnecessary hesitation. Over time, this association becomes automatic. Breaking that pattern requires immediate physical engagement before mental resistance fully forms. The early hours of the day are particularly sensitive. They set the emotional and energetic tone for everything that follows. If the body remains passive during this period, the rest of the day often reflects that passivity. Tasks feel more difficult than they should. Motivation fluctuates. Focus becomes inconsistent. These effects are not random. They are connected to how the day begins physically. Moving the body first creates a different trajectory. It introduces discipline through action rather than thought. There is no need to negotiate with motivation or wait for emotional readiness. The body simply moves, and that movement becomes the foundation for everything that follows. This approach removes dependency on feeling prepared. Preparation becomes irrelevant because action happens before internal resistance has time to develop. When movement is the first response, hesitation loses its influence. The body leads, and the mind adapts afterward. There is also a subtle emotional shift that occurs through early movement. Energy that feels stagnant after waking begins to circulate. A sense of alertness replaces heaviness. Even mood improves slightly, not because circumstances change, but because physiology changes. The connection between physical state and emotional state becomes more visible through repetition. Over time, this practice creates a reliable pattern. The body becomes accustomed to early activation. The mind begins to expect movement as the start of the day rather than stillness. That expectation reduces internal resistance. What once required effort begins to feel natural. The most important aspect of this habit is timing. Delaying movement reduces its impact. Once the mind is allowed to settle into inactivity, it becomes harder to initiate change. The effectiveness of early movement lies in its immediacy. It happens before distraction, before digital input, and before mental negotiation begins. Modern environments make stillness even more dangerous in the morning. Devices are often within reach, and passive consumption is always available. Without intentional movement, the first interaction of the day often becomes external input rather than internal activation. This shifts attention outward too early, weakening control over focus. Physical movement restores internal direction. It brings attention back into the body, into sensation, into effort. That return creates stability. Instead of being pulled outward immediately, the mind remains grounded in action. This grounding is what supports sustained focus later in the day. There is a difference between energy that is stored and energy that is activated. After sleep, energy exists but remains dormant. It does not automatically translate into productivity. It must be activated through physical engagement. Without activation, that energy remains underutilized, often turning into restlessness or distraction instead of focus. Early movement channels that energy into useful direction. It prevents it from dispersing into scattered thoughts or unnecessary consumption. Once energy is directed physically, it becomes easier to direct mentally. The system aligns through action. This practice also strengthens discipline in a quiet but consistent way. Each morning that begins with movement reinforces the ability to act without delay. That ability transfers into other areas of life. Tasks that once felt difficult to start become easier to approach. Resistance decreases, not because tasks change, but because initiation becomes familiar. Momentum built through movement does not remain limited to the body. It spreads into decision-making, task execution, and focus. Once the system is activated physically, mental activation follows with less effort. The entire day becomes easier to manage because the starting point was strong. There will be mornings when energy feels low or motivation feels absent. These are the moments where the habit becomes most important. Waiting for perfect energy conditions reinforces delay. Moving despite low energy builds resilience. It teaches the system that action is not dependent on feeling ready. Consistency matters more than intensity. Even minimal movement is enough to trigger the shift. The goal is not to exhaust the body but to awaken it. Over time, even small actions become powerful signals that the day has begun with intention. As this practice continues, a noticeable change emerges in how mornings are experienced. Instead of feeling slow or uncertain, they become structured and active. The gap between waking and productivity narrows. The body no longer remains in passive mode for extended periods. This shift influences identity as well. A person who consistently moves first begins to see themselves as someone who initiates rather than delays. That identity reinforces behavior automatically. Action becomes the default response instead of hesitation. What starts as a simple physical habit evolves into a deeper form of discipline. It becomes a way of controlling the starting point of every day. And when the start is controlled, the rest of the day becomes significantly easier to direct. Chapter 6. Do the hardest thing before you seek comfort. Most people structure their day around comfort without even realizing it. Comfort becomes the hidden priority behind almost every decision. The moment something feels difficult, attention shifts away from it. The mind searches for easier alternatives, smaller tasks, or temporary distractions that feel safer in the moment. This pattern slowly builds a life where important actions are always postponed and comfort is always placed first. The problem is not comfort itself. Rest and ease are necessary. The problem begins when comfort is used as a reward before effort has been earned. When ease comes first, discipline weakens. The mind learns to avoid resistance instead of facing it. Over time, this creates a cycle where difficult tasks feel heavier than they actually are, simply because they are repeatedly delayed. Doing the hardest thing before seeking comfort breaks that cycle at its root. It reverses the order of behavior. Instead of earning comfort after effort, comfort is postponed until effort is complete. This change may seem simple, but it fundamentally reshapes how decisions are made throughout the day. Hard tasks carry psychological weight, not because they are impossible, but because they require sustained focus and emotional resistance. The mind naturally avoids anything that demands discomfort. If given a choice between ease and difficulty, ease will always feel more attractive in the moment. That attraction is temporary, but it is powerful enough to influence behavior unless it is consciously overridden. When the hardest task is completed first, something important happens internally. The resistance loses influence early. The task that would normally hang over the entire day is removed immediately. Instead of carrying avoidance in the background, the mind experiences relief through completion. That relief is not passive. It is earned through direct engagement with difficulty. There is a strong difference between delaying difficulty and confronting it immediately. When difficulty is delayed, it grows in perceived size. The mind builds anticipation around it. It becomes something that looms over the rest of the day, draining focus even when not actively being worked on. When it is handled first, that mental weight disappears, and the rest of the day feels significantly lighter. Comfort becomes more dangerous when it is used as an escape from discomfort. Small comforts such as unnecessary scrolling, extended breaks, or passive entertainment provide immediate relief, but they quietly reduce the ability to handle effort later. Each moment of avoidance reinforces the idea that discomfort should be avoided rather than faced. This weakens discipline without obvious signs. Choosing discomfort first is a way of reclaiming control over attention. It forces the mind into a state where action is required before relaxation is allowed. This order matters. When effort comes before ease, effort becomes normal. When ease comes before effort, avoidance becomes normal. These patterns are built quietly through repetition, not intention. The hardest task is usually not difficult because of skill requirements, but because of emotional resistance. It might involve uncertainty, focus, patience, or sustained mental effort. The challenge often lies in starting rather than continuing. Once engaged, the task is rarely as overwhelming as it initially appeared. The anticipation is usually heavier than the execution. Starting with that task removes the anticipation entirely. There is no long build-up, no extended waiting period where doubt can grow. The mind does not have time to create elaborate reasons for delay. Action interrupts overthinking before it expands. This interruption is crucial for maintaining clarity. There is also a physical dimension to this principle. Energy levels are naturally higher earlier in the day or after initial activation. Using that energy on easier tasks first creates a false sense of productivity while leaving the hardest work for later, when energy is lower and resistance is higher. This often leads to postponement or incomplete execution. Reversing the order solves this problem. By placing the most demanding task at the beginning, energy is applied where it is needed most. Even if the task is not completed quickly, progress is made when capacity is strongest. That early engagement reduces friction for the rest of the day. Another important effect of this practice is emotional stability. Unfinished difficult tasks create subtle background stress. Even when ignored, they occupy mental space. This creates internal tension that affects focus on unrelated activities. Completing the hardest task removes that tension entirely. The mind becomes quieter and more stable afterward. This stability influences decision-making for the rest of the day. With the most demanding task already completed, smaller tasks feel easier to manage. There is less internal resistance because the most significant challenge has already been faced. This creates a sense of momentum that carries forward naturally. There is a misconception that motivation is required to start difficult work. In reality, motivation often appears after action has already begun. Waiting for motivation delays execution unnecessarily. Action creates motivation, not the other way around. Starting the hardest task immediately triggers engagement, which then generates focus and energy during the process itself. The habit of delaying comfort until effort is complete also strengthens self-control. Each time discomfort is chosen over ease, a small internal reinforcement takes place. That reinforcement builds over time, gradually reshaping how decisions are made under pressure. The mind becomes less reactive and more intentional. Comfort itself becomes more meaningful when it is earned rather than taken freely. Rest feels more satisfying after meaningful effort. Breaks become genuine recovery instead of avoidance. Even simple relaxation carries more value when it follows completion rather than delay. This shift changes the emotional quality of the entire day. At the beginning, this practice requires conscious effort. The temptation to start with easier tasks or quick distractions will appear frequently. The mind will attempt to justify delay in subtle ways, suggesting that preparation is needed or that energy should be preserved. These thoughts are part of resistance, not guidance. Consistency resistance. Each time the hardest task is completed first, the pattern becomes more familiar. What once felt difficult to initiate becomes a standard approach. Over time, the decision is no longer debated. It becomes automatic behavior. There is also a deeper identity shift that occurs. A person who consistently chooses the hardest task first begins to see themselves differently. They are no longer someone who avoids difficulty, but someone who confronts it directly. This identity reinforces future behavior, making discipline more stable and less dependent on mood. Eventually, the order of the day becomes predictable in a productive way. Difficulty first, then ease. Effort first, then rest. Action first, then comfort. This structure removes uncertainty from decision-making and replaces it with clarity. The mind no longer needs to negotiate between competing impulses. The long-term impact of this principle is not just increased productivity, but increased trust in oneself. When difficult actions are consistently completed before comfort is allowed, the mind learns reliability. That reliability becomes the foundation for confidence in larger goals and more complex challenges. In the end, doing the hardest thing before seeking comfort is not about punishment or forcing struggle. It is about training the mind to respect effort more than avoidance. It is about ensuring that ease is something earned, not something used as a barrier against progress. Once that order is established, discipline becomes less about force and more about natural direction. Chapter 7. Track every completed task to strengthen your discipline. Most people underestimate the power of noticing progress. They work through their day, move from task to task, and rarely stop to acknowledge what has actually been completed. The focus stays fixed on what is still unfinished, what still needs attention, and what feels demanding. Over time, this creates a mental imbalance where effort feels endless and progress feels invisible. When progress is invisible, discipline becomes harder to maintain. The mind does not naturally stay committed to effort that feels unrewarded. Without evidence of completion, motivation weakens. Tasks begin to feel repetitive, even when they are meaningful. The sense of advancement fades, and effort starts to feel like repetition instead of growth. Tracking every completed task changes this pattern at its core. It introduces visibility into effort. Instead of relying on memory or vague impressions of productivity, there is clear evidence of action taken. Each completed task becomes a recorded moment of discipline. That record matters more than most people realize, because the mind responds strongly to proof. There is a difference between working and recognizing work. Many people work throughout the day, but never acknowledge what has been achieved. This creates a distorted perception where the day feels unproductive, even when real progress has been made. That perception weakens consistency, because the brain does not associate effort with reward. When tasks are tracked, even small actions gain weight. A simple completed task is no longer forgotten or dismissed. It becomes part of a visible pattern of behavior. That visibility reinforces identity. Instead of seeing effort as scattered or inconsistent, the mind begins to recognize a pattern of completion. This recognition is essential for discipline. Discipline is not built only through action, but through awareness of action. Without awareness, repetition loses meaning. With awareness, repetition becomes reinforcement. Tracking transforms effort into structured evidence of growth. The act of marking completion creates a psychological shift. It signals closure. When a task is marked as done, the mind releases it. Without that signal, tasks remain mentally active, even after physical completion. That lingering presence creates unnecessary cognitive load, which reduces clarity and focus for the next task. By recording completion, mental space is cleared intentionally. Each completed entry becomes a form of release. This allows attention to fully shift forward without carrying unfinished residue from previous work. The result is a lighter, more focused mental state throughout the day. There is also a motivational effect that develops over time. Seeing a growing list of completed actions creates momentum. That momentum is not abstract. It is visually and mentally reinforced. Each completed item becomes proof that discipline is active, not theoretical. That proof encourages continuation. Without tracking, effort can feel like it disappears into time. Days blend together, and it becomes difficult to measure consistency. With tracking, time becomes structured. Progress becomes measurable. Even on difficult days, there is clarity about what was accomplished instead of a vague sense of effort without direction. This clarity is important because the mind responds strongly to measurable progress. When improvement is visible, persistence becomes easier. When progress is unclear, motivation weakens. Tracking removes ambiguity. It replaces uncertainty with structure. Another important effect of tracking is accountability. When tasks are written down and completion is recorded, there is a subtle pressure to maintain consistency. That pressure is not external. It is self-imposed through awareness. The act of seeing unfinished patterns encourages follow-through in future actions. Over time, this creates a feedback loop. Action leads to completion. Completion is recorded. Recorded completion reinforces identity. That identity then supports further action. The cycle becomes self-sustaining. Discipline is no longer forced, it is reinforced continuously through observation. Many people rely on memory to evaluate productivity. This approach is unreliable. Memory tends to exaggerate either success or failure depending on emotional state. On difficult days, effort feels smaller than it actually is. On easy days, productivity feels larger than reality. Tracking removes this distortion by providing objective reference points. Even simple tracking methods can have a strong impact. Writing down tasks as they are completed, marking progress step by step, or maintaining a daily log creates structure. The method itself is less important than the consistency of use. What matters is the habit of acknowledging completion. There is also a subtle psychological reward in marking progress. Each completed task produces a sense of closure and satisfaction. That satisfaction is not dependent on external validation. It comes directly from recognition of effort. Over time, this internal reward system becomes more influential than external motivation. This shift is powerful because external motivation is unstable. It changes depending on environment, mood, and circumstances. Internal recognition created through tracking is stable. It remains consistent regardless of external conditions. That stability strengthens discipline in the long term. Tracking also improves focus during execution. When there is awareness that completion will be recorded, attention naturally becomes more deliberate. Tasks are less likely to be half-finished or rushed without care. The presence of tracking encourages more intentional engagement with each action. It also reduces procrastination indirectly. When tasks are tracked, avoiding them becomes more visible. Inaction is no longer hidden in time, it is noticeable. This awareness reduces the tendency to delay, because delay becomes part of a visible pattern rather than an invisible habit. As the habit develops, a shift occurs in how progress is perceived. Instead of focusing on how much is left to do, attention begins to shift toward what has already been completed. This change in focus is critical for sustaining long-term discipline. It creates a sense of advancement rather than depletion. Even on days with limited productivity, tracking ensures that effort is not erased mentally. A small number of completed tasks still provides evidence of discipline. That evidence prevents discouragement and supports continuity. Without tracking, those small wins are often forgotten, leading to unnecessary self-criticism. Over time, Recorded completion becomes a personal archive of discipline. Looking back at previous days reveals patterns of consistency that might not have been noticed in real time. That archive builds confidence because it shows that effort has been ongoing. Even when progress felt slow, confidence built through evidence is more stable than confidence built through emotion. Emotional confidence fluctuates. Evidence-based confidence grows steadily. Tracking creates that evidence systematically. There is also a structural benefit. When tasks are tracked, patterns of productivity become visible. It becomes easier to see when focus is strongest, when distractions are more frequent, and when energy levels fluctuate. This information allows for better planning and more effective use of time. Without tracking, these patterns remain hidden. The same mistakes repeat without awareness. With tracking, behavior becomes observable, and observable behavior can be improved. This creates a continuous cycle of refinement. Eventually, tracking becomes more than a tool. It becomes part of identity. A person who consistently records completed tasks begins to think differently about effort. Work is no longer just something done. It is something recognized, structured, and built upon. This recognition strengthens discipline in a quiet but lasting way. It turns effort into something visible, progress into something measurable, and consistency into something undeniable. Over time, that visibility becomes one of the strongest supports for long-term personal growth. Chapter 8. Act quickly when fear appears and keep going. Fear rarely arrives as something dramatic. It usually appears quietly in subtle thoughts that suggest hesitation. A task is about to begin, and suddenly the mind introduces doubt. It questions readiness, timing, or capability. The feeling is not loud, but it is enough to interrupt action if it is allowed to grow. Most people mistake this moment as a sign to pause, when in reality it is only a signal that movement is about to begin. The mind is designed to protect, not to push forward. Its natural tendency is to avoid uncertainty and choose familiarity. Fear is often the result of stepping into something that requires effort beyond routine behavior. It does not always mean danger. More often, it means growth is being approached. That distinction is critical, yet it is often ignored. When fear appears, the most important factor is speed of response. The longer hesitation continues, the stronger fear becomes. It does not remain static. It expands when given attention. A small doubt can grow into full avoidance if it is allowed time to develop. This is why immediate action is essential. Movement prevents fear from stabilizing. Acting quickly breaks the cycle before it forms. Instead of analyzing the fear, attention shifts to execution. The body moves before the mind constructs arguments for delay. This simple reversal is powerful because fear depends on delay to survive. Without delay, fear loses structure and influence. Many people attempt to remove fear before acting. They wait until they feel confident, ready, or certain. That condition rarely arrives on its own. Confidence is not a requirement for action. It is a result of action. Waiting for fear to disappear creates unnecessary delay and reinforces hesitation as a default response. When action happens immediately, something important changes internally. The mind begins to adjust to the situation through experience rather than imagination. Fear is strongest when it is based on anticipation. Once action begins, imagination is replaced by reality. That shift reduces the intensity of fear naturally. There is a clear difference between thinking about a task and engaging with it. Thinking allows space for fear to expand. Engagement compresses that space. Once involved in the task, attention becomes occupied, leaving less room for hesitation. This is why starting is the most important point of control. Fear often feels convincing because it uses uncertainty as its foundation. The mind projects possible outcomes, most of which are exaggerated or incomplete. These projections feel real in the moment, but they are not grounded in actual experience. Acting quickly disrupts this projection process before it becomes dominant. The goal is not to eliminate fear completely. Fear will appear whenever new challenges arise. The goal is to prevent fear from influencing behavior. It can exist without control. It can be present without determining direction. That separation is built through repeated action in the presence of discomfort. Each time action is taken despite fear, the mind learns a new pattern. It begins to associate discomfort with survival rather than avoidance. Over time, fear loses authority over decisions. It becomes a signal rather than a barrier. This shift does not happen instantly, but it becomes stronger with repetition. There is a moment between recognition of fear and response to it. That moment determines direction. If hesitation fills it, fear expands. If action fills it, fear weakens. Training attention to shorten that gap is one of the most effective ways to build discipline. Speed becomes a form of control. Keeping going after fear appears is equally important. Many people manage to start, but stop when discomfort returns. Initial action is not enough if it is not sustained. Fear can reappear during execution, especially when effort becomes challenging or uncertain. The response must remain consistent. Continue moving. Continuing despite fear reinforces stability. It shows that discomfort does not dictate behavior. It builds resilience through experience, not theory. Each moment of continuation weakens the association between fear and stopping. Over time, persistence becomes more natural than withdrawal. Fear often increases when progress becomes visible but not complete. Midway through difficult tasks, uncertainty can return strongly. The mind may suggest that stopping would be safer or easier. This is where discipline is tested most clearly. Continuing through this phase builds deeper strength than initial action alone. Avoidance provides temporary relief, but it strengthens long-term hesitation. Each time fear leads to stopping, the mind records the pattern. It becomes easier to stop in future situations. Conversely, each time fear is ignored and action continues, the opposite pattern is reinforced. Persistence becomes more automatic. Acting quickly also reduces emotional buildup. When fear is analyzed too long, emotions intensify. The situation begins to feel heavier than it is. Immediate action prevents this buildup by shifting attention away from internal interpretation and toward external execution. Physical movement plays an important role in this process. Once the body engages, mental resistance weakens. Action creates structure where fear previously created uncertainty. That structure stabilizes focus and reduces emotional fluctuation. The body leads the mind into clarity. There is also a practical benefit to speed. Many tasks become easier once started. The difficulty often lies in anticipation, not execution. Delaying action magnifies perceived difficulty. Starting immediately reveals the actual difficulty, which is often more manageable than expected. Fear thrives in distance. The further a task is from action, the larger it appears. Reducing that distance through immediate engagement weakens fear's influence. The task becomes real rather than imagined. Reality is easier to handle than projection because it contains limits and structure. Over time, responding quickly to fear changes internal identity. A person begins to see themselves as someone who acts despite discomfort, rather than someone who waits for comfort. That identity shift is powerful because it influences future behavior automatically. Decisions become faster and more decisive. This practice also reduces hesitation in unrelated areas of life. When the mind becomes accustomed to immediate action in one context, it begins to apply the same response elsewhere. The habit spreads beyond specific tasks and becomes a general pattern of behavior. Fear will not disappear entirely, but its authority diminishes. It becomes a passing sensation rather than a controlling force. The mind learns that fear does not require avoidance. It can be acknowledged and still overridden. That separation is the foundation of emotional discipline. The most important aspect of this principle is consistency. Occasional bravery does not reshape behavior. Repeated response to fear with action builds lasting change. Each instance reinforces the same message. Movement continues regardless of discomfort. Eventually, the gap between fear and action becomes extremely small. There is no extended pause for analysis or debate. The response becomes direct. Recognition leads almost immediately to movement. That speed transforms how challenges are experienced. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable through familiarity, not because difficulty decreases, but because resistance decreases. The mind becomes trained to proceed even when uncertainty is present. That training is what creates real discipline. Acting quickly when fear appears and continuing without stopping is not about removing emotional experience. It is about preventing emotion from controlling direction. Once that control is removed, action becomes independent of temporary states, and in that independence, consistency begins to grow in a stable and lasting way. Chapter 9. Protect your focus by removing distractions from reach. Focus does not fail suddenly. It weakens slowly through small interruptions that seem harmless in the moment. A quick glance at a screen, a short reply to a message, a few seconds of checking something unrelated, these moments appear insignificant on their own. But together, they fragment attention until deep work becomes difficult to maintain. The mind becomes trained to shift constantly instead of staying steady. Real focus is not only about concentration, it is about protection. It must be guarded from unnecessary interference before it is even tested. Most people try to strengthen focus by willpower alone, but they ignore the environment that continuously weakens it. Without removing distractions, attention is forced to fight repeated battles throughout the day. That constant struggle drains mental energy. Removing distractions from reach is a direct way to reduce that struggle. It is not about resisting temptation repeatedly. It is about reducing exposure to temptation in the first place. When distractions are physically close, they require constant self-control. When they are removed, self-control is preserved for meaningful work instead of small decisions. The mind naturally seeks the easiest source of stimulation. If distractions are accessible, attention will drift toward them during moments of fatigue or boredom. This is not a flaw in character, it is a predictable response to environment. Discipline becomes much easier when the environment does not constantly invite interruption. Focus is fragile at the beginning of any task. The first few minutes determine whether attention will stabilize or scatter. If distractions are within reach during this phase, the risk of breaking focus increases significantly. Once attention is broken, rebuilding it requires additional effort and time. That repeated restart cycle reduces overall productivity. Physical distance plays a powerful role in behavior. When something is within arm's reach, it requires almost no effort to access. That ease creates temptation. When access requires effort, even small effort, the likelihood of interruption decreases. This simple shift in distance changes decision-making without requiring mental resistance. Removing distractions does not require complexity. It requires intention. The goal is to eliminate unnecessary triggers that compete for attention. Devices, notifications, and unrelated materials often create background noise even when not actively used. That noise weakens the ability to stay engaged with one task for an extended period. A focused environment is not silent by accident. It is structured. Everything within reach should support the task being done. Anything that does not support it becomes a source of fragmentation. This applies not only to physical objects, but also to digital environments. Each accessible option is a potential break in attention. Many people underestimate how often they interrupt themselves. External interruptions are only part of the problem. Internal habits of checking, switching, and reacting are reinforced by easy access to distractions. When those options are removed, the habit of interruption weakens naturally over time. Attention behaves like energy. It is limited and directional. When it is scattered across multiple inputs, its strength decreases. When it is directed toward a single task without interruption, it deepens. Deep focus is not created by force. It emerges when competing signals are reduced. The cost of distraction is not always visible immediately. A short interruption may only take seconds, but the mental cost is larger. After each interruption, the mind needs time to return to the previous level of focus. That transition creates invisible loss of productivity that accumulates throughout the day. Protecting focus means protecting continuity. Continuous attention allows work to develop naturally without repeated resets. Ideas become clearer, decisions become faster, and execution becomes smoother. Without continuity, every task feels fragmented and incomplete. Even when effort is high, there is a difference between working near distractions and working without them in reach. In one case, attention is constantly aware of alternatives. In the other, attention is fully committed to the task at hand. Commitment deepens performance because the mind is no longer divided between options. Environment design plays a crucial role in discipline. Instead of relying on willpower to resist distractions repeatedly, it is more effective to structure surroundings so that resistance is not constantly required. When the option to drift is removed, focus becomes the default state rather than a struggle. This approach also reduces decision fatigue. Every time attention shifts toward a distraction, a decision is made to either engage or resist. Repeated decisions weaken mental energy. By removing distractions from reach, those micro-decisions are eliminated, preserving mental strength for meaningful work. There is also a psychological benefit to clean environments. A space free from unnecessary stimuli creates a sense of clarity that supports sustained thinking. Visual simplicity reduces cognitive load. When the environment is organized around a single purpose, the mind naturally follows that structure. Over time, this practice trains attention to remain stable even in more challenging environments. By repeatedly working in controlled conditions, the mind learns how to maintain focus for longer periods. That training carries over into situations where distractions cannot be fully removed. However, relying on willpower alone in distracting environments often leads to inconsistency. Discipline becomes dependent on mood or energy levels. When energy is high, focus is strong. When energy drops, distraction takes over. Removing distractions from reach removes this dependency and stabilizes performance. There is also a timing element that matters. Early stages of any task are the most vulnerable to interruption. Once deep focus is established, it becomes easier to maintain. The goal is to protect that initial phase as strongly as possible by ensuring that nothing nearby can break attention prematurely. Even small distractions can have large effects over time. A single interruption may seem harmless, but repeated interruptions create fragmentation. Fragmentation prevents tasks from reaching depth. Without depth, work remains surface level and requires more time to complete. When distractions are physically removed, the mind experiences fewer external triggers. That reduction creates a calmer mental state. Instead of constantly reacting to potential interruptions, attention remains anchored in one direction. That stability improves both speed and quality of work. Another important effect is the reduction of procrastination. When distractions are easily accessible, starting work feels harder because alternatives are visible. When distractions are removed, there is no competing option in sight. This makes initiation easier and reduces delay before starting tasks. The practice of removing distractions also strengthens self-awareness. It forces recognition of what actually pulls attention away. This awareness is essential for long-term discipline. Without identifying sources of distraction, behavior remains reactive instead of intentional. As this habit develops, focus becomes less about effort and more about structure. Instead of constantly resisting temptation, attention naturally stays aligned with the task because nothing nearby disrupts it. This creates a smoother workflow with fewer interruptions and less mental strain. Eventually, a shift occurs in how work is experienced. Tasks feel more complete, progress feels more consistent, and time feels more controlled. The difference is not in ability, but in environment. When distractions are removed from reach, attention is allowed to operate at its full capacity without constant interference. Protecting focus is not about fighting distraction endlessly. It is about designing conditions where distraction loses access. Once that structure is in place, discipline becomes less about resistance and more about continuation. And in that continuation, real progress begins to compound naturally. Chapter 10. Repeat action daily until progress becomes your habit. Real change does not arrive in a single moment of inspiration. It does not appear after one powerful decision or one highly productive day. Most people overestimate what can be done in a short burst of motivation and underestimate what can be built through repetition. Progress is not created by intensity alone. It is created by consistency repeated long enough that effort stops feeling unusual and starts feeling normal. At the beginning, action feels deliberate. Every step requires conscious effort. There is awareness of time, resistance, and internal hesitation. Nothing feels automatic yet. This stage is where most people quit, not because the work is impossible, but because it still feels like effort. The mind has not yet adjusted to the rhythm of repetition, so every action feels like a decision instead of a pattern. Repetition is what transforms effort into structure. When the same type of action is performed daily, the mind begins to recognize it as expected behavior rather than something new. That recognition reduces resistance. What once required motivation begins to require less internal negotiation. The action becomes familiar, and familiarity reduces friction. Progress becomes a habit only after enough repetition removes the need for constant decision-making. At first, each day feels separate. One good day does not guarantee the next. Energy fluctuates, focus varies, discipline feels fragile, but as repetition continues, the gaps between effort and identity begin to close. The action stops being something done occasionally and starts becoming something that defines the day itself. The power of daily action lies not in perfection, but in continuity. A single missed day does not destroy progress, but repeated inconsistency weakens the structure. The mind learns patterns quickly. If action is frequent, it expects action. If delay is frequent, it expects delay. These expectations become self-reinforcing over time. Repeating action daily builds internal reliability. It creates a sense of trust between intention and behavior. At first, intentions are often stronger than execution. Many plans are made that are not fully completed. But when repetition becomes a rule, the gap between intention and execution begins to shrink. That gap is where most discipline fails. Closing it is what transforms effort into identity. There is a stage where repetition feels mechanical. The mind may resist the lack of novelty. It may seek variation or excitement. But this resistance is temporary. Once consistency is maintained long enough, repetition stops feeling like limitation and starts feeling like stability. Stability is what allows deeper focus and stronger results. Each repeated action reinforces neural pathways that make future execution easier. The body and mind adjust to patterns that are practiced consistently. What once felt heavy gradually becomes lighter. What once required effort begins to happen with less internal resistance. This is not sudden transformation. It is gradual alignment through repetition. Daily action also removes the burden of restarting. Restarting is one of the most draining aspects of discipline. When behavior is inconsistent, every attempt requires rebuilding momentum from zero. That constant reset weakens progress. Repetition eliminates that cycle by keeping momentum alive across days. Even when intensity fluctuates, there is also a psychological shift that happens when action becomes routine. The mind stops questioning whether the action will happen and begins focusing on how it will be done. This shift is subtle but important. It reduces internal debate and increases execution speed. Less time is spent deciding, more time is spent doing. Progress becomes visible not in sudden leaps, but in accumulated continuity. Small actions repeated daily build outcomes that appear gradual at first, but become significant over time. The accumulation is often unnoticed in the moment, which is why many people underestimate it. But repetition has a compounding effect that only becomes clear when viewed across longer periods. One of the strongest benefits of daily repetition is emotional stability. When action is consistent, Emotional fluctuations have less control over behavior. A bad mood no longer determines productivity. A low-energy day does not cancel progress. Instead, action continues regardless of temporary internal states. This separation between feeling and doing is essential for long-term discipline. The mind naturally prefers variation in the short term, but stability in the long term. Repetition satisfies that long-term need. It creates structure that reduces uncertainty. When actions are predictable, the mind conserves energy that would otherwise be spent on constant evaluation and decision-making. Over time, repetition builds identity. A person does not become disciplined through a single decision. They become disciplined through repeated behavior that eventually defines who they are. Identity is not formed by intention alone. It is formed by consistent evidence of behavior over time. Each repeated action adds to that evidence. There will be moments when repetition feels slow. Progress may not appear immediately visible. This is where patience becomes important. Real development often happens beneath the surface, before it becomes externally noticeable. Systems strengthen quietly before results appear clearly. The absence of immediate change does not mean absence of progress. Continuing action during these periods is what separates temporary effort from lasting transformation. Many people stop when results are not immediate, but consistency through slow phases is what produces eventual breakthroughs. Repetition is what carries effort through invisible stages of growth. Daily action also simplifies life. Instead of constantly deciding what to do next, there is a clear direction that is repeated. This reduces mental clutter. Simplicity in action leads to clarity in thought. When decisions are reduced, energy can be redirected toward execution rather than planning. As repetition continues, discipline becomes less about force and more about rhythm. The action becomes part of the structure of the day. It is no longer something debated or questioned. It becomes expected. That expectation is what stabilizes progress over time. Eventually, repetition leads to automatic behavior. The mind no longer resists initiation in the same way it once did. Action begins more quickly, with less hesitation. The space between intention and execution becomes smaller. That compression of time is where real efficiency develops. What starts as effort gradually transforms into habit. And once something becomes a habit, it no longer requires constant reinforcement. It operates in the background of daily life, supporting progress even when motivation is low or circumstances are difficult. Repeating action daily until progress becomes. Habit is not about forcing constant intensity. It is about maintaining continuity long enough for behavior to reshape itself. Through repetition, resistance fades, structure forms, and discipline becomes part of identity rather than temporary effort.